Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Sharon Florentine. Welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, DevSecOps Principles in Service Management, brought to you by xMatters, an Everbridge company. We have an awesome webinar for you today, as usual, but before we get started, I need to go through some quick housekeeping items with you. First, please remember that the session is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of it, you'll be able to go back and watch it again. We'll send you an email afterwards with instructions for accessing the webinar on demand. You can always visit us at devops.com/webinars, and it will be there for you as well. We are taking questions throughout the presentation, so use the Q&A tab on your console to submit those at any time. We will get to as many as possible at the end of the presentation. We'll also have a short poll for you right before the Q&A, so if you wouldn't mind taking a couple seconds when you see that pop up and give us your response, we'd really appreciate it. Stick around till the end because we are doing our drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So make sure you stick around and see if you are a winner. All right, so with that, I am pleased to introduce to you today Matt Frauenhoffer. He's a solutions architect with xMatters, which is an Everbridge company. I am going to turn my camera off and my microphone and let Matt get right into it.
All right. Hey, everybody. How are you? So I wanted to kick off today by introducing myself. My name is Matthew Frauenhoffer. I'm a solutions architect here with xMatters, which was recently acquired by Everbridge. And if you are not familiar with who xMatters is, we're a company that is focused on service reliability. And what does that mean? It's really about how do we take services in organizations and how do we make sure that your response processes and the availability of those systems is adequate in order for them to serve their purpose. And we provide a platform upon which you can facilitate the communication to those various stakeholders, incident resolvers, etc., throughout the entire value stream. So today we're going to talk through DevSecOps, its principles, and how they apply to traditional service management paradigms. Now, let's start off with, well, what is service management? Let's just set a baseline definition. Service management is kind of defined by Axelos, the organization that manages the ITIL standard, as a concept that enables an organization to maximize their business value from the use of information technology. All right, what does that actually mean? Well, at the end of the day, service management is all about the different processes and procedures that you are doing within your organization in order to deliver some sort of service or value to the business or even to your end customers. Now, you could think about it from a customer perspective of, say, a retailer. Your service might be that you are providing an e-commerce front end that's all digitally powered to your and customers who are actually buying clothes or whatever the goods are that you're selling. You could also look at it as internal services where maybe you're the database team and you provide all the databases or you manage all the databases throughout your organization. You can use the same concepts and the same philosophy in managing those two different platforms and delivering those services. And that's what ITIL in the past has really tried to address. However, throughout the years and throughout the evolutions of ITIL, that kind of became very, what's the right word for it? Bloated. And so at the end of the day, we came up with this thing called DevOps, and more recently, DevSecOps. And well, what is that? Well, it's kind of funny. If you ask numerous individuals, what is the definition of DevOps? You're going to get, say you ask 2 people, you're probably going to get 10 answers depending on the day and the time. Because DevOps was even designed by its founders and by the thought leaders that came up with these concepts as not having a definition. In the 2021 State of DevOps report that just came out, I think about a month ago now, there was actually a quote from Patrick Dubois in there saying we didn't have a plan when we talked about DevOps. And a lot of the thoughts and concepts came from just talking about things that people wanted to improve. So at the end of the day, if I think about what DevOps is, to me, it's around that central goal. It's how do I improve how I'm delivering my services? So if I'm a mainframe developer who's writing COBOL code still on a mainframe, and I want to improve how I deliver that service and ultimately the business value that the organization gets, I can do DevOps with that. There's not a single set of capabilities that I need to deliver in order to be doing DevOps. It's really about what does it actually take to improve how I'm delivering this service and improving the reliability, the security, etc. of that service. There are best practices that have evolved over the past several 10, 12, 15, 20 years of what works and what has been proven to work, but there's not something that you're constantly trying to achieve. There's not a golden set of rules that once you hit these, you are doing DevOps. That's not what DevOps was ever intended for. So specifically, if we think about DevSecOps and what we're trying to accomplish, specifically when we're looking at the difference between DevOps and DevSecOps, what is DevSecOps trying to achieve more than just DevOps? Well, oftentimes the organization, when they're adopting DevSecOps principles or trying to achieve this, they're really wanting to reduce their risk in their organization. They're wanting to close gaps in their security posture. And they're also wanting to prioritize finding vulnerabilities in their applications that could then be exploited and thus exposing and passing on that risk to their customers. They're also wanting to create trust and a sense of trust with their customers. So for example, with the X Matters, we actually have an entire site that shows all of the controls and measures that we take and what certifications we have for that, our platform. We also want to make sure that we're protecting corporate data assets, reducing the impact of security breaches, and ensure the traceability of changes and other controls so that we actually can make sure that we're adhering to all of the different privacy regulations. For example, GDPR is a monstrous undertaking and is essential to any businesses who have customers or users in the European Union and increasingly all throughout the world. And ultimately, it's only going to become more and more stringent. And so that is why we're trying to adopt DevSecOps principles, is to ultimately achieve these two things. So what is DevSecOps not? What are we not trying to achieve? Well, we're not trying to just apply more layers of security. Just because I have, say, 5 locks on a door, but the door frame isn't held in properly, if I can just still kick the door and have the door frame fall out of the wall, Doesn't matter how many locks I have on the door. The structural framework is such that those locks don't matter. I'm still going to get through. And all I did is make it harder for somebody who is good and following the rules. Now they have to unlock 5 locks instead of just one. We want to make sure that we're remaining lean, but protecting everything as adequately as possible. DevSecOps is not establishing a dedicated security team. It's not about just isolating this down to a single team in order to drive all of our company's security and security initiatives, especially within IT. That's actually part of the reason where we've gotten where we are. DevSecOps, we want to collaborate and have collaborative cross-functional teams so that security is embedded as part of the platform team that is taking care of that quote-unquote product. DevSecOps is not a transformation project. A transformation project is oftentimes, it implies that there is an end goal. There is an end state. And once we hit that end state, that's as far as we're going. DevSecOps is not about getting to an end state and then not going any further. Continuous improvement is always part of any DevOps or DevSecOps initiative. And so just because you hit this one milestone, it's time for an iterative approach where we're looking, okay, what can we do now to further improve on that? Are we as good as we can be? And even if we say, yes, we are, oftentimes it takes an outside perspective to actually point out where we think we're safe and secure that we're in fact actually not. And finally, DevSecOps is not about compromising ROI. Security should be looked at as additional value. The fact that your service or your platform is secure is actually additional value to your service. It's not supposed to be something that is that compromises or adds additional layers and makes it impossible to use to where you're just driving away potential users or customers. Security should be as seamless as possible and as user-friendly as possible so that the consumer has trust in your platform. Now, how do we do this? Well, Jez Humble and others came up with kind of a nice framework called CALMS, and it stands for Culture, Automation, Lean IT, Measurement, and Sharing. Now, DevSecOps is oftentimes, it's that holy grail, it's the pinnacle, it's the top, but it has to be founded upon a solid base. And ultimately, that base is culture. Why is culture important? If I don't have the psychological safety to go in and say, hey, I think we've got an issue here because I'm afraid of being fired or whatever the case may be, that is the single largest problem area that needs to be addressed. No amount of automation, no amount of security scans or anything else is ultimately going to get you to a true, lean, collaborative environment where security can be truly baked into your organization. It takes a safe culture for people to be able to thrive, not just as employees, but also bring to light other issues and ultimately building reliable services, which is what DevSecOps is ultimately trying to achieve. And then we have 4 other pillars: automation, lean IT, measurement, and sharing, that are all built upon that foundation, that base of your organizational culture. The first one, automation. That's one of the places that I kind of want to dive a little bit. No amount of automation is ultimately going to give you DevSecOps. You need to have it as part of the pillars, and you need to automate as much as you possibly can. But ultimately, automation by itself is not going to give you what you're looking for and what you're striving for. Lean IT. Lean IT is the idea that all of these things, all of the different areas that we are, where we have IT services, we need to make sure that they are delivered as efficiently as possible. Measurement, you always need to have metrics that you're driving towards, and we'll dive into that in a couple slides. And then sharing. That culture foundation, ultimately, you need to be able to collaborate across different teams and learn from various points of your organization. My perspective from the database team is going to be a completely different perspective than, say, your your front end team, for example. Different perspectives are always good, and ultimately, what you need to be able to have this sort of DevSecOps initiative. So to get there, we have some different types of actions. We've often heard of shift left as the SDLC, the software development lifecycle. And we want to shift all the proactive stuff that we can to the left. We want to do it as early as possible. Some of these things, especially around security, might be in the area of culture. We want to include security as part of the requirements for that initial application. Now, some of you will probably say there's no such thing as requirements in DevOps. I don't buy that. A requirement is simply, what do I need this thing to do? Everybody has that. Whether you call it a story, whether you call it a requirement, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you call it. Your requirement is something that you need this to do. You need to include security, functionality, and security as part of that design. It needs to be baked in from the very beginning. So a user story that says, I need to have, as an end user, I want to be able to purchase. I need to be able to change that user story and say, as a user, I want to be able to securely purchase. And then we need to dive into that and say, okay, I need you to securely store my data, my personally identifiable information. I need all of that to be secure. I need a hacker or somebody may not be able or should not be able to get my credit card number, for example. They shouldn't be able to get my email address without me explicitly giving permission. All of that needs to be baked into the development lifecycle of this application or of this service. Product managers and engineers need to be constantly challenged while also having end user empathy in the service. So at the end of the day, just product managers and engineers need to be challenged by end users. They need to be challenged by different perspectives and different types of people with different areas of focus. More perspectives are better. Now, obviously, there's times where that can go off the rails, and we need to have a smaller team. But ultimately, the most diverse viewpoints will ultimately give you a better result. And we also, along with the end user empathy, we need to make sure that security is not an option to the end user. It needs to be as seamless as possible so that by default, everything is secure as it can be and as transparent as it can be to that end user. They shouldn't have to say whether they want to encrypt social security number, or they want to hide their information or anything like that. It needs to be transparent. It just needs to happen. And only then, only after they've had experience with it, do we offer maybe a configuration of less security. And I personally would argue, not even then. There's no point in not being secure. And we need to make sure that our culture is aligned, that we want to target applications. We want to try to penetrate by using ethical hackers and ethical hacking services, third parties, or even having our own staff that is actively trying to break our applications and our software. We need that perspective and we need that action to be able to better build resilience into our applications and even our processes. As you'll see in one of our case studies that we're going to bring up, it wasn't necessarily the fact that the actual application. It was actually by virtue of the process and the pipeline that developed this application that hackers were actually able to exploit it and open up a wide, vast security hole that most of you are familiar with. From the automation perspective, we need to make sure that we're always including security tests in our CI/CD pipelines. We need to automate this as much as possible. Now, some will say, well, let's have the developers do more. And my response will be, why? Why do we need developers to do more? Especially if they're not used to that. If I'm a developer, my just human nature in general is to not necessarily put extra work into a process. There are some superstars out there, absolutely. I try to be one of them, but I'm definitely not always the superstar that I wish I was. That's always a goal that I have. But if I'm told that I need to do more work to write secure software or anything like that, I'm going to be resistant, because my very nature and all of our human nature is to say, I'm doing the best I can already. And maybe I have a little bit of room for improvement, but to add all this workload and all this manual process, I don't know if I can do that. By putting it as part of the CI/CD pipeline, all of these scans and analysis can be done for me. And that's your way in. If security is not already part of the mindset of your development team, bake it into the CI/CD process. Get that in as early in the pipeline as possible. Don't wait till the end where you send it to a security team to review and to scan later. Build it into the CI/CD pipeline, where then you can get your static analysis and even your dynamic analysis while you're running your normal QA or your normal unit tests. Make sure that your code and your applications are as secure as possible as early as possible. Digitally sign your binaries. Make sure that you have these the signatures and verify them at every step throughout the CI/CD process. Once that application is built, make sure that that binary that you're deploying and each file that you're deploying and putting on a different environment is the same file. It's relatively simple to do and ultimately can help make sure that you're not being affected, and ultimately can really achieve or lead to achieving better system reliability results. Now, from a lean perspective, we want to make sure that we define and have designs that are security inclusive. Include them as early as possible That way we're not waiting until the very end, finding out that what we've designed is not actually secure. Bring it in as early as possible. Now, there are also some reactive things that we need to do in an organization in order to have a fully secure application. From a culture perspective, we need to realize no fortress is impregnable. If you haven't been hacked, in all likelihood, kind of borrowing from more prominent than I individuals who I know have said this before, in all likelihood, if you don't think you've been hacked, it's just that you don't know it yet. You have already likely been breached. And everybody needs to come to the table when we discover a breach, and we need to make sure that we're not punishing the messenger or necessarily punishing the guys who wrote the code, the development staff who wrote the code that turned out to have security vulnerabilities. We're humans. And as long as we're going to be around, ultimately, people are going to find ways around the different places and controls that we have put in place. We need to make sure that during our smoke tests in our prod and our non-prod environments, we are actually monitoring those environments, and those are where we're ultimately constantly looking for vulnerabilities and looking for different areas of penetration, and then also doing root cause analyses with that data that has been captured in those environments. From an automation perspective, we want to make sure that we always have security monitoring of our production and our non-prod environments. And even from a non-prod environment, don't think of your CI/CD pipeline as immune from this. Your CI/CD pipelines are production environments. They are used to produce production code. They need to be secured as such. Implement chaos engineering. Start utilizing chaos engineering principles in order to both build resilience of your application and making sure it can withstand the appropriate level of chaos, but also from a security perspective. Make sure that your application and your services are able to withstand dynamic security tests happening on your production environments. Because inevitably, at some point, a change will be made directly in production that was not in a non-production and given enough time to stew and sit there before that change gets made. You're going to have differences between your non-prod and your prod environments. And when those changes occur, that's when you have vulnerabilities that you may not know about. And then from a lean perspective, you always want to be able to find and treat all of your major incidents as a value stream. How long does it take us to treat a major incident from the beginning to the end? How long does it take us to get to an adequate response? How long was the response time to stopping an attack or mitigating an attack? How long did it take us to get a service back up? And then feed that information back to the engineering team and pay attention to that technical debt. Don't let that sit. These security vulnerabilities are critical and ultimately need to be solved as soon as they can and mitigated as soon as they can. And then across all of these, we need to have security professionals that determine what is our regulatory risk? What is my organization's responsibilities when it comes to making sure we comply with GDPR principles? We need to make sure we're doing this in prod and non-prod environments. Security needs to be part of the business value and success criteria that we define at the very beginning of the process. And we need to have security scorecards that are constantly being updated and looked at as part of measurement of are we adequately providing the service? This is what we should be looking at to determine whether we're doing a good job. Security is something that we need to constantly be evaluating. And then sharing. Security is everyone's job. It's not a department. We need to make sure that anybody who brings forth a security issue in an organization is not put down or subjected to any sort of improper employment actions or driving the wrong behavior, causing people not to report these issues. When an attack occurs, we need to make sure that we have a damage analysis team that is looking at both the business impact as well as the IT impact. And we need to have and be empowered by leadership to have red teams and blue teams running security drills and making sure that they're working together as appropriate to ultimately give us the reliability and resilience that we need in the world we live in today. So let's go through a few of these use cases that we have. SolarWinds. I brought this one up. Didn't name it by name, but I'm sure everybody knew who I was talking about. Supply chain attack on their platform that all of the SolarWinds products, for the most part, were built off of, called Orion. Malicious code was actually added into the SolarWinds product itself through their own continuous delivery pipeline. The end result was cascaded, and almost 18,000 customers were made vulnerable because of this. There was a mitigating hotfix update, and then a second update ultimately came out to fully resolve it. But the business was fined. There was significant, and still is significant, trust issues. Ultimately, I don't want to say that this could have been prevented, but because the CI/CD pipeline was not treated as a production system, not monitored as such, it became vulnerable. Different parts and the elements of your delivery process of delivering your services, they are production systems and they need to be treated as such. Throughout my many years of IT experience, and I'm guilty of this as well, I am not immune to this. We always set up our Jenkins server as HTTP. It was internal, it was protected, right? It wasn't exposed to the internet. Now we know better. We know better. These applications, the different processes that we have put in place, all need to ultimately be treated as production systems and production value streams. Otherwise, this is what can ultimately happen. Our second example, British Airways. There's a vulnerability that was discovered in a third-party JavaScript library used by British Airways. The vulnerability had been well known since 2012, and a hacking group inserted 22 lines of code that diverted crucial information into a separate site. Ultimately, personal data of over 400,000 individuals were leaked, and payment card numbers, CVV numbers, usernames and passwords of users and accounts. And the lessons learned were ultimately a lack of cultural acceptance of security as value. The culture was not aligned to take security seriously. The ID of a known risk and a known point of exposure, it should have led to an immediate fixing. It should have been prioritized, but instead, it was pushed off as part of the backlog for this particular website and not fixed for 6 years. And ultimately, the response times, because of this discovery and the reporting of this, they were unacceptable. And before this was even mitigated, took way too long. All of these pieces are now interconnected, and we have to take proactive steps to make sure that we're including all of these pieces in delivering DevSecOps in our organizations. So as an example of what this tool chain might look like, you might have Jira, might have FireEye, you might even have our Everbridge mass notification or control center or another offering from Everbridge. Ultimately, it all needs to funnel into a platform for incident management. Now, this might be ServiceNow, it might be XMatters, it could be any number of other platforms, but ultimately, all of these signals need to come into this platform. And ancillary information needs to be gotten and provided as contextual information, because information without context is not that valuable. And ultimately, that information needs to be sent out to the appropriate teams, be they executive teams, stakeholders, resolvers, the incident commander. All of those need to have a coordinated engagement to come in, resolve the problems, and then update your stakeholders and your customers for the long haul and make sure that your services remain reliable. So, what is the biggest practical thing you can do? Start. Do something. Too many organizations start off with the easy stuff. They start off with, let's just throw Jenkins in there, let's do a CI/CD pipeline, and let's make sure that we have continuous integration into our environment. And that's a good start. But each one of the areas that we've talked about in the past, just previously, they all need to just be started. Momentum will grow. It could be as simple as engaging the security team a little bit earlier during the planning process, instead of waiting until the very end to ultimately bring them into the fold. Let them know a little bit. Start off by just creating this recurring meeting. Very little time, but I think you'll see that there's a lot of good information that can come of that, and a lot of good collaboration that ultimately can come of that. So as we wrap up here, if you want to learn more about XMatters, you can certainly reach out to us on all the social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and I will turn it back over to Sharon, and we'll see what questions have been submitted.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. All right. So let's see here. What have we got? First of all, folks, I need to remind you, I'm going to push out a real quick poll for you. So if you would not mind going ahead, and that should be popping up on your screen. Let us know what you think about that. And folks, please, we've still got plenty of time here. If you want to submit some questions, please go ahead. I'm going to ask Matt what he thinks one of the best sources would be if folks want to learn more about DevSecOps. Are there any resources that you use in particular, or that you would point folks to?
Yeah, good question. So obviously devops.com, I have to give give them a plug.
Thank you.
There's a lot of great resources there. But honestly, there's a lot of good information on Twitter. There are a lot of people that are very prominent in this philosophy and just in the software development and tech industry in general that I've found a lot of benefit from just following. I don't contribute that much on Twitter. I should, but I learn a lot just by watching as well. So that would be a good place to go. There are a lot of great books. The Phoenix Project, the Unicorn Project, and then there's a couple others that might be able to toss out as an email after this that really take a lot of these principles and give a lot of good illustration behind it. That would be a great place to start, and then just kind of go from there, and start just thinking about how can I do this better. Because again, like I said at the beginning, DevSecOps is not something that has a singular definition. My definition and your definition are likely going to be very different, or at least a little bit different. So at the end of the day, we need to just improve what we're doing, improve how we're delivering these services, and just start there.
Just like you said, the most important thing to do is just start. Yep. All right. So let's see what else. Here's a good one. This person they're not a manager, but they want their organization to start adopting some of these principles. So what can they do as an individual contributor?
Yeah, good question. So what I did and what worked for me was ultimately talking to my coworkers. It was a lot of times there was a desire from the organization for us to improve, but they didn't really ask us or tell us, hey, you need to go do DevOps, or go implement DevSecOps. And oftentimes, just throughout my industry experience, those initiatives oftentimes fail. The initiatives that work the best are the ones that are started from the individual contributors. So if you see that maybe a component that you work on is slightly vulnerable, or if you have the opportunity or the friendship and the relationship with the person that manages your build system, maybe talk to them about, well, how can we integrate with the security team and develop those individual relationships with people and take the initiative to start these conversations. Don't just wait for management to come in and say, hey, you guys should do this, because at the end of the day, they're likely not going to. Do as much as you can at your level, and ultimately then take that up to the next person, your manager, your team lead, or what have you, to grow what you're trying to do even bigger and make it more of a widely adopted thing. Show that initial initiative, which can be difficult in some organizations, but oftentimes just starting with a little thing can oftentimes spark a much larger initiative down the line.
Yeah. And just to go back to our previous question, Danielle has a great point here. She mentions the benefits of being a member of the DevOps Institute, which has a great library of resources for individual training as well as group training. I know today they're actually doing a skill up day. They do periodic monthly skill up days. Today's, in fact, is on DevSecOps. So thank you so much, Danielle. Definitely check that out, DevOps Institute. All right, let's see. Here's an interesting one about the differences of opinions and ITSM versus DevOps. And if they're mutually exclusive, or it seems Arvind agrees with, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and I don't think they should be positioned as being at odds. But how would you address those kinds of misconceptions and talk about the potential for both of those?
Yeah, that it's definitely a difficult one, right? Because at the end of the day, there's not a silver bullet per se that's going to take care of all of this. A lot of this is down to human behavior. It's about how do we convince people that have these strongly held beliefs that ITSM is bad and DevOps is good. How do I convince the ITSM folks that DevOps principles are actually good for them? It all comes down to how well we can ultimately articulate the benefits. I think the important thing is, as a third party coming into a conversation, I try not to initially take sides and ask more questions. I want to lead the people that I'm with to their own conclusions by asking more questions. So say I've got an incident management team or a manager on that is very ITSM heavy. Well, why? What's working well? If we did it another way, what would you be missing from that? And obviously, those individuals need to be open to having a conversation. Just because we disagree about methods does not mean that we have to disagree about the ultimate goal. Because I think the ultimate goal for all of these initiatives is to make sure that our services that are being provided are ultimately delivered better to our end customers. They're more secure, they're more reliable, and ultimately that makes our job easier. It means I don't have to be up at 2 a.m. I can actually sleep. I don't have to be awake trying to resolve an issue.
Right.
And if automation can do that, I'm not going to necessarily be resistant to that. There's a lot of protectionism in these different, to try and protect my job and how I've done things. They need, again, it goes to psychological safety. They need to understand that doing something different than the way they've always done it doesn't mean that their jobs are gone. It just means that they might be doing something different, and the experiences that they've had ultimately make for a better solution at the end of everything.
Yeah. And it might open up
that
opportunities.
Yeah.
It might open up opportunities for new roles or new responsibilities too. So.
Yep.
All right. I think we've got time for a couple more here. Here is another question we will take. We have several DevOps initiatives going on in our company, but they're all focused on CI/CD processes. Will that get us far enough?
Good question. So if we look back at the Calms architecture, automation is simply a pillar. It's not going to get you all the way there. But automation is integral to getting the rest of the way there. I can't get to that holy grail of DevSecOps and lean IT and efficiency without automation. There's too many things that can go wrong when a human is involved in the loop. If I can take a lot of that mundane work that I mess up all the time on and automate it away so that it's a consistent, repeatable thing that's happening, that it becomes predictable, now I'm able to then deliver a better product. So it's going to get you, it's definitely going to get you, if you had no automation before and now you're introducing automation, it is most certainly going to get you more of the way there. And it's going to get you more agile, moving faster, most certainly. But is it going to give you everything you need? No. There are many other aspects to DevSecOps than just the automation part. And I think that's where a lot of misconceptions come, especially when talking to leadership. And where oftentimes a lot of people want to just buy tools. They think that DevSecOps is about buying or utilizing Jenkins or Jenkins, Jira, and whatever other tools. DevSecOps is not just tooling. There's a whole other human aspect to it and a whole other set, of processes that need to be adjusted in order to fully realize the benefits. Are you going to get some benefits from tooling choices? Absolutely. You need tools. But tools are not going to be the only thing that gets you there.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, folks, for those awesome questions. And thank you so much, Matt, for that amazing presentation. All right. So I am going to go ahead and close out this poll here. Thank you all so much for taking the time to submit your responses for that. I also need to remind the audience that the session has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, you will be able to go back and watch it again. We're going to send an email with instructions for accessing it on demand, and you can always visit us at devops.com for information about DevOps, DevSecOps, and to access this and other webinars on demand. All right, so now it is time to announce the winners of our Amazon gift card drawing. And those winners today are Michael O., Linda G., Paul P., and Tara J. Congratulations to all of our winners. That is awesome. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We're going to send an email to our winners, with instructions for claiming your gift card. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. And if you don't see it, make sure and check your spam folders. All right, that's really it for me, I promise. We hope to see you all again soon at another webinar. Thank you again so much for your time, and thank you, Matt. And yeah, we'll see you next time. I'm Sharon.
Thanks, everybody.
Signing off.